King Charles had faced public rebellion, family betrayal, and private grief. But nothing prepared him for the file placed before him that morning. The investigation had reached a devastating conclusion. Queen Camilla had authorized secret changes to internal succession preparations without the king's approval. As Charles read the final page, his hand stopped moving. He placed the file down, looked across the silent room, and whispered only one word: "Why?" Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles remained alone after the investigators left. The internal palace inquiry began when senior officials discovered two conflicting versions of succession instructions inside the royal household's administrative system. These were not laws changing who would inherit the throne. They were transition papers, meaning private plans deciding who would advise the next monarch, enter emergency meetings, receive sensitive briefings, and control ceremonial priorities when power passed between reigns. Someone had altered that future quietly and without permission. The king returned to the page carrying the most damaging conclusion. Camilla had personally approved changes expanding her household's authority during the transition to William, while reducing the roles assigned to Catherine and Princess Anne. The monarch felt disbelief harden into humiliation. He had defended the queen consort through criticism and public anger, yet she had been reshaping the next reign while standing beside him and saying nothing. Camilla received the order in a message from her senior secretary. She was not to call Charles. She was not to enter his rooms. She stood beside a chair without sitting, reading the words twice as fury overtook fear. The investigation had reached her husband before she could control the explanation, and the silence between them was punishment. Charles examined the handwritten mark beside the disputed changes. Investigators had matched it to the queen consort's documented approvals in household records, leaving no room to blame an aide. Another entry revealed something darker. One official had challenged the revisions months before, warning in a recorded internal account that they weakened William's future authority. Days later, that official was transferred away from succession planning without explanation. The king closed the file, but the truth would not stay contained inside it. He ordered William and Anne to come immediately. He did not summon Camilla. Across the palace, that omission carried more force than any declaration. The monarch was no longer examining an administrative breach. He was confronting betrayal inside his marriage. Yet before Charles could decide what punishment Camilla deserved, he had to face the people whose futures had been quietly rearranged behind his back. Behind the language of succession stood 4 wounded people. Charles saw a marriage collapsing beneath the weight of secrecy. Camilla saw years of influence slipping from her hands. William saw an intrusion into the future he had spent his entire life preparing to inherit. Catherine felt something even more painful, a deliberate attempt to weaken her voice before she had ever been given the chance to use it. Charles had spent years trying to balance the crown with his devotion to the woman beside him. The crown meant more than a throne. It was the authority, duty, and continuity carried by the reigning monarch. He had defended the queen consort through public anger and private resistance, often believing that protecting her was part of protecting his reign. Now that loyalty had turned the investigation into more than a palace crisis. It had become a judgment on his marriage and his own ability to recognize betrayal. William entered the private office without ceremony. The prince took the altered papers from the desk and found the passage concerning Catherine. Succession planning was not simply a schedule for future ceremonies. It decided who could enter urgent meetings, advise the new sovereign, receive security information, and shape the first unstable hours after one reign ended and another began. He read the reduced authority assigned to his wife, then raised his eyes toward his father. "Did you know?" Charles opened his mouth, but no answer came quickly enough. The king's hesitation lasted only seconds, yet it landed like a confession. William looked back at the page, wounded less by what had been written than by the possibility that his father might have allowed it. Catherine received the findings from her husband in a private conversation recorded later in the investigation notes. She remained calm as he explained that her access to the First Family Council had been delayed. A family council was the private gathering where senior royals would discuss immediate duties and decisions surrounding a new monarch. When the room finally emptied, the princess gripped the back of a chair and told William the change felt personal. He did not disagree. Anne studied the same summary with colder anger. The princess circled the removal of her emergency authority and pushed the file toward Charles. She told her brother that someone had tried to isolate William at the most vulnerable moment of his life. The king stared at the marked paragraph, realizing the attack had reached far beyond Catherine. Camilla's version granted 2 members of her private household earlier access to sensitive briefings. The Queen Consort's advisors would have entered before Catherine, remaining close to decisions that belonged to William's future reign. Every alteration protected the same small circle. William noticed the pattern first. He placed the pages side by side and asked who had requested the earliest change. Charles looked toward Anne. Catherine remained silent. Camilla was nowhere in the room, yet her influence filled it. The answer would lead them away from the final report and back to a single palace ceremony, where the first forbidden instruction had quietly been given. The conspiracy did not begin in a locked archive or during a secret midnight meeting. It began beneath the controlled formality of a royal ceremony, when one unexpected decision left Camilla publicly diminished and privately enraged. What appeared to others as a minor change in protocol became the trigger for everything that followed. Months later, investigators would return to that moment and recognize it as the true point of no return. Charles had approved a sharper division between his wife's present duties and Catherine's future position. The king believed clarity would prevent confusion when William inherited the crown, meaning the authority and responsibilities of the reigning sovereign. Camilla understood the decision differently. She feared that as the Prince and Princess of Wales moved closer to power, her household would lose access, funding, ceremonial importance, and any lasting influence once her husband's reign ended. The private succession rehearsal at Windsor carried more weight than anyone admitted. A succession rehearsal was a confidential practice session preparing senior royals for the transfer of responsibility between one reign and the next. Charles instructed Catherine to stand beside William during the first transition briefing. He then placed Princess Anne in charge of the Emergency Family Council, the private group expected to coordinate immediate royal duties during a crisis. Camilla remained composed until the rehearsal ended. The Queen Consort then followed her husband into a side room and closed the door behind them. No aides stayed. No cameras recorded what came next. She asked why Catherine had been placed beside William while she had been moved away from the center of the discussion. Charles did not soften his answer. The king told her that the next reign had to belong to William and Catherine, not to those whose authority would end with his own. Camilla stared at him as if the words had stripped away more than a ceremonial position. She heard a warning that once he was gone, she would become unnecessary. The silence changed her. The Queen Consort left without touching the tea, waiting beside her, carrying humiliation into the corridor and resentment into the days that followed. Charles believed the argument had ended. He did not understand that his wife had begun viewing succession planning as a battle for survival. Camilla acted within 48 hours. She requested a private administrative review of continuity arrangements, a harmless-sounding term for plans controlling who retained access and influence during the transfer of power. A senior clerk later documented that she demanded revisions before William's household could inspect the next draft. She also insisted that her involvement remain outside the normal approval chain. Investigators eventually uncovered a brief note written after that request. Her Majesty requires protection from future exclusion. Charles recognized the language immediately. It belonged to someone who had advised Camilla for years, and who knew exactly how to turn her fear into palace policy. With the hidden motive exposed, and the first accomplice identified, Charles could no longer postpone the confrontation, waiting behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace. When Camilla entered the room, Charles was already standing. The disputed succession file rested between them, open to the page carrying her approval mark. No advisors were present. No private secretary remained to soften the language. For several seconds, husband and wife simply stared at one another. Then the king pushed the file across the table and demanded to know why the woman he had trusted had tried to control a reign that was not hers. Charles had chosen privacy before punishment. The king wanted one final explanation before ordering any formal disciplinary action, meaning an official restriction or penalty imposed within the royal household. Camilla entered believing she could describe the alterations as continuity measures, plans designed to keep royal duties stable if the monarch died or became unable to serve. She expected anger. She did not expect the coldness in her husband's voice. The king pointed to the reduced authority assigned to Catherine and Anne. He asked whether Camilla had approved those exact changes. The queen consort did not deny it. She said someone had to stop William's household from erasing everything she had built the moment the next reign began. Charles struck the table once with his palm. The sound carried anger, but the force behind it was grief. He told her that protecting her dignity did not give her permission to weaken his son, delay Catherine, or remove Anne from emergency decisions. The monarch had spent years defending his wife's place. Now he understood that she had used that protection to reach into a future that did not belong to her. Camilla refused to retreat. The queen consort accused him of abandoning her to secure William's loyalty. She reminded Charles of the years she had endured public hatred, private mockery, and constant doubt. Then her voice hardened. She said the family had accepted her only while she served the present. But the moment the future arrived, everyone expected her to disappear quietly. Charles asked who had written the disputed language. The king repeated the question. Camilla remained silent. That refusal told him more than any confession could. One signature had approved the changes, but another hand had built them. The monarch then revealed what investigators had recovered from documented internal messages. Camilla had demanded that the revisions be completed before Catherine gained access to the planning papers. The queen consort looked toward the file, and for the first time, certainty left her face. Charles ended the meeting with a decision. He removed her access to all succession briefings, confidential meetings preparing the transfer of royal authority, and ordered her private office sealed pending a full review. Camilla turned toward the door without answering. The king stopped her with one final sentence. Investigators had uncovered another name. She froze, but she did not turn around. The confrontation shattered the marriage, but the greater danger now lay with the person who had transformed Camilla's fear into an organized attempt to control the crown's future. Camilla had supplied the fear, but someone else had supplied the method. Hidden beneath polite memoranda and routine administrative language was the work of a senior household official who understood exactly how royal power moved. He knew which paragraph could be changed without drawing attention, which briefing could be delayed, and which signature could make an unauthorized instruction appear permanent. Yet his greatest mistake was believing Charles would never examine the machinery beneath his own throne. The investigation named Sir Alistair Vale as the architect behind the altered succession papers. The senior administrator attached to Camilla's household had converted her private demands into formal instructions that appeared legitimate. Vale could not change the legal line of succession, the lawful order deciding who inherits the crown. But he could manipulate access, precedents, advisors, communications, and emergency duties. Those details decided who entered the room, who spoke first, and who stood closest to power when the next reign began. Princess Anne sat opposite Vale during his formal questioning. The princess placed the recovered messages between them and watched him carefully. His hands remained still while investigators described the altered approval chain. Then William's name was mentioned. His fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Vale insisted that he had acted to prevent chaos. He claimed Charles had become emotionally dependent on William's support, creating an unstable balance inside the palace. According to his recorded testimony, Camilla feared the future king's household would seize control too quickly and remove every advisor connected to her. The official argued that he had protected continuity, not challenged it. Anne rejected the excuse, without raising her voice. The princess told him that continuity meant preserving lawful authority during change. It did not mean secretly choosing who would surround the next sovereign. Vale had not protected the monarchy. He had tried to control William before he ever reached the throne. The evidence grew darker. Investigators discovered that the administrator had used an outdated royal authorization code, a security marker once accepted as proof that senior approval had been granted. That code allowed him to bypass the king's private secretary, the monarch's chief official responsible for reviewing sensitive documents before they reached Charles. William demanded every paper prepared during Vale's tenure be withdrawn. The prince ordered a complete audit, meaning a line-by-line examination of each instruction, followed by replacement documents under joint oversight. Charles approved the demand immediately. The king now understood how close he had come to signing away control without realizing it. A hidden schedule revealed the final move. Vale planned to place the altered version inside a larger bundle of routine papers, expecting Charles to approve it without noticing the changes. Camilla's fear would then have carried the king's signature. Guards arrived to escort the official away. Vale rose, looked directly at Anne, and delivered one final warning. The unauthorized draft had already reached more people than the family understood. By the time the palace discovered how far the document had traveled, the crisis was no longer confined to a marriage, an office, or a sealed investigation room. The consequences arrived before sunrise. Access cards failed. Briefings were cancelled. Officials who had spent years serving Camilla were ordered to surrender files and leave their offices under supervision. Across the palace, phones rang with the same unanswered question: how many people had seen the altered succession plan? But behind the administrative chaos was a more brutal reality. The king and queen were now living beneath the same roof as strangers. Charles moved before the crisis could spread any further. The king suspended every succession document connected to his wife's office and placed the entire process under William, Anne, and his private secretary. A private secretary was the senior official responsible for managing the monarch's most sensitive work and communications. The decision mattered because whoever controlled those papers could shape access, advice, and authority during the first dangerous hours of a new reign. Suspicion moved through the household just as quickly. Staff members were separated into small groups for questioning, and courtiers who had worked together for years began watching one another in silence. Some feared dismissal. Others feared that their names had already appeared in recovered messages. Trust, once taken for granted, had become another casualty of the investigation. Camilla reached her private office and pressed her access card against the reader. Nothing happened. The queen consort tried again, slower this time, as two guards stood nearby without meeting her eyes. She lowered her hand and understood what the silence meant. Before any public announcement, her authority had already been stripped away inside the place where she had once felt protected. Camilla sent a furious message demanding to see Charles. She accused him of treating her like an enemy inside her own home. The king refused the meeting. Alone in his study, he lifted their framed wedding photograph from the desk. He held it for several seconds, then moved toward the drawer but stopped. Charles could remove her access in a single order. He could not erase the years behind the image so easily. The investigation widened. Extracts from the unauthorized plan had reached a ceremonial committee, a security office, and an external constitutional advisor, meaning a specialist consulted on how royal authority should operate during a transition. William then discovered something worse. Several officials had already begun preparing around the altered version. Camilla's changes were close to becoming normal palace practice. William demanded immediate correction. Catherine's full role was restored in writing, while Anne regained her emergency authority. Every member of the Queen Consort's household was removed from future transition planning. The prince prepared to go further. He wanted Camilla excluded from all royal decision-making, not only succession matters. Before he could make the demand, Charles sent a private message asking his son to meet him alone. That meeting would decide whether the crisis ended with punishment alone, or whether father and son could finally rebuild the trust that Camilla's actions had nearly destroyed. By dawn, secrecy had collapsed. Britain awoke to a royal scandal, unlike any ordinary dispute over titles, money, or family invitations. This was a story about the future of the crown itself, and the possibility that private fear had entered the machinery of succession. Outside palace gates, cameras gathered before the official statement appeared. Inside, Charles listened as broadcasters described the crisis his own household had failed to contain. Buckingham Palace released the statement shortly after sunrise. The palace was not merely a royal residence. In official language, its name represented the central office, speaking for the monarch. The announcement confirmed that unauthorized administrative changes had been discovered and withdrawn. It also stressed that the legal order of succession, the lawful sequence deciding who inherits the throne, had never been changed. That distinction mattered. The crown remained secure, but the system surrounding it had been dangerously manipulated. The statement went further. Charles, William, Catherine, and Anne would now control all transition planning under a completely restructured process. The king's words avoided naming Camilla directly, yet her exclusion was unmistakable. The Queen Consort had lost access to the machinery she once tried to influence, and the public understood the meaning immediately. The fictional London Chronicle captured the shock in a single front page. Against a black background, it printed a photograph of Charles leaving a service alone beneath the headline, "The King Betrayed Inside His Own Palace." Copies disappeared from newsstands within hours. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath the cold morning sky. One woman stepped forward and placed a small card against the railings. It carried 6 words, "Protect the future, not private power." Camilla watched the morning broadcast alone. The Queen Consort remained still, as one presenter explained that her influence over succession planning had ended permanently. Before her photograph appeared on the screen, she reached for the remote and switched off the television. Silence replaced the public judgment, but it could not erase it. Charles endured something even harder. The king listened as commentators questioned how he had allowed his wife's household to gain so much access. An aide quietly offered to prepare a response defending his judgment. The monarch refused. He said the criticism was deserved. The palace then confirmed that every altered document had either been destroyed or replaced, and that each recipient had formally accepted the corrected version. William and Catherine appeared together at a scheduled engagement later that day. The prince said nothing about the scandal. The princess did not need to. Their calm unity became the image of continuity the monarchy desperately needed. That evening, Charles prepared one final statement. It was not written for broadcasters, newspapers, or the crowd outside the gates. It was meant for Camilla, William, and the future he had nearly allowed to fracture. With the country demanding certainty and the family demanding truth, the king faced one final duty: to declare what would survive after trust had been broken. The final decision was neither exile nor forgiveness. It was something colder and more permanent: the separation of private love from public power. Charles gathered Camilla, William, Catherine, and Anne for one last meeting, and read the directive himself. Every unauthorized change was void. Every hidden instruction was erased. The future would return to those responsible for carrying it, and the Queen Consort would never again be permitted to influence the succession. Charles placed the binding household directive on the table. The king had signed an official order controlling how the royal household would manage future succession and transition planning. A household directive was a formal instruction governing the monarch's staff, access, duties, and internal decisions. From that moment forward, authority would rest with the sovereign, the heir's spouse, Princess Anne, and approved constitutional officials. The order went further than Camilla expected. Her private household was permanently removed from succession briefings, emergency councils, regency preparations, future appointments, and ceremonial transition plans. A regency was the legal arrangement used when a sovereign could not perform royal duties. The queen consort could still stand beside her husband at limited public events, but she could no longer shape the machinery surrounding the next reign. Charles read every restriction aloud. The king reached the final page, signed his name, and placed the pen down. Then he turned it away from Camilla. The gesture was quiet, but its meaning was final. Her agreement was neither required nor invited. Camilla looked at the man she had fought beside for years. The queen consort did not apologize for fearing exclusion. She admitted, however, that she had crossed a boundary no consort had the right to cross. Charles told her that he still remembered everything they had endured together. But love could not excuse interference with the crown. His voice broke only once, when he admitted that her secrecy had made him doubt his own judgment. William received the corrected succession framework directly from his father. The prince understood that the document restored more than procedure. It confirmed Catherine's future authority beside him, not as a personal favor, but as recognition of her place in the next reign. The princess accepted the papers calmly, while Anne agreed to oversee an independent annual review so no private household could manipulate the system again. The consequences were immediate. Sir Alistair Vale was permanently dismissed from royal service. Every official involved lost access to sensitive work, and the corrected documents became the only recognized framework for the future. Charles and Camilla remained publicly married, but their political partnership ended. She continued limited ceremonial duties while living outside the monarch's closest decision-making circle. The marriage survived in name, yet the trust that had once held it together did not. The investigation delivered a brutal verdict. The monarchy's greatest danger had not come from crowds, critics, or rival claimants. It had come from private fear disguised as royal necessity. William, Catherine, and Anne left carrying the restored framework. Camilla departed through another door. Charles remained behind for one final moment before rising to follow his heirs. The crown endured because the king finally chose duty over denial. But the price of saving the succession was the private world he could never fully rebuild. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.